Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading update for MLK Weekend 2024. We can kind of say that because this long weekend actually became a little bit longer thanks to snow in my area, and work was canceled and I got a 4-day weekend out of it, and I used the extra time to try to squeeze in more reading, which I'm very excited about. But I went as long as I could, and now it's early on the morning of a day I actually have to go into work. We're into midweek craziness now. It's certainly not a end of week anything, but I have books to share, and that makes me happy, and I at least closed my blinds, so hopefully the lighting isn't too ridiculous, but basically I want to get my show on the road. So the first thing I do when I start these AM reading videos is I read a short story from a literary magazine. And to start off 2024, I've moved on to this collection of American short fiction from summer 2023. And the first story in here is Arrows by Jamel Brinkley, which is actually kind of exciting because I just was reading his name on the long list contenders for the BookTube Prize, so maybe we'll be reading his short story collection in full for the prize. We'll have to see. But here's a little teaser of his work. This is a story where a young father and the son of, let's say, troubled individuals is narrating. His name is Hassan. Ostensibly, in the story, he is trying to move his ailing father, who's blind and elderly, out of the house that he grew up in and into a home. And also, Hassan's son Zahir is staying with him overnight. He's estranged from his wife. And then the other occupant of the house is the ghost of his mother, Helena, who definitely, I think, isn't meant to be, a part of Hassan's imagination, but is supposed to actually be Helena herself and be commentary on what types of people actually stay in their homes, and like that. It goes into a metaphor that goes into the title that like they're facing backward because they have beef with the past and they get stuck with an arrow, so that's how they stay on Earth. And Helena doesn't want her husband to move out of the house, or in fact, or at the very least, she's going to keep haunting the house, which Hassan is concerned about because he'd like to sell it. And so Hassan's just stuck in a bit of a rock and a hard place. His father is a bit contemptible. He seems to have a past where he's also been pretty irritable, and then he's difficult to move around now that he's being forced out of his home. And Zahir is just, I feel like, in an in-between place, like that, he's kind of stuck between his parents and, where he fits in the world because they're estranged, and he's also relatively young. So there's a lot of tension in the story. It kind of, ultimately, there's interaction between the ghost and the grandfather, and Hassan having to comfort his son over that, and and when things do go Hassan's way, that he's able to move his father out, and his son seems more or less okay. It's just open-ended, I guess, about what's going to happen next, and a big question is, like, I guess, about the heredity of this problematic nature with the past, and whether Zahir will fall, and his father, Hassan's father, will fall into the same sort of trap that Helena has, and that if there might be ghosts for generations, as it were, because this family does seem to be pretty fraught. So I thought that it's interesting ruminations, going into obviously some surrealist aspects about ghosts and all of that, about being stuck in the past, and how you kind of get caught up in relationships and history and all of that. And I'll stick with short stories for a moment longer because I've just started. I'm slowly eking through the 2023 edition of Best American Short Stories. The general editor is Heidi Pitlor, and this edition's editor is Min Jin Lei. So I make it a tradition in January to read last year's collection of Bast, to keep acquainted with some of the most buzzy literary short stories in the US and Canadian lit mags. and it's slow going so far. I'll probably be eking through this through my other AM reading videos this month. We'll have to see, but I'll highlight one story to begin with that I've read so far, and that one will be Do You Belong to Anyone by Maya Binyam. And it's a very strange sort of story. It's almost a deeply obstinate story that very much refuses to give any specific details about what's going on. It is a stubbornly passive voice, so that we have a lot of distance from specificity. But in general, you can tell from some of the hints that the authors laid down that her narrator is a man who is traveling from the country, probably America, where he has been living and is now a citizen. He's been living there like 24 years, and he's going back to the country of his birth, where a lot of his family lives, and you can kind of assume that it is a coded black country because of a hint that, you know, this man is a taxi driver in the U.S., and some inebriated passenger called him the N-word. So that's where I'm going for with that. The whole thing about do you belong to anyone, like it starts on the plane where he's sitting next to this man. Sorry, there is construction outside. I imagine it's going to interrupt me some. But anyway, he is sort of watching through the corner of his eye this man's movie that he's watching on the plane, and it involves somebody wandering the streets and asking people, do you belong to anyone? Do you belong to anyone? And then things get absurd from there. The man ends up, the non-protagonist man ends up dying on the plane, and the actual protagonist gets a lot of condolences from other passengers as they pass him about this stranger. Then we get into a taxi cab into the in the country he's arriving at, and he you know, ruminates and talks with the taxi cab driver. I mean, it's a sort of a surprise that he's a taxi cab driver in the U.S. because, you know, everyone thinks you'll get rich when you go there. And then there's other conversations he overhears. He's prepping, obviously, to meet up with the family members, but he feels distant from them as well. And other conversations are even more distant that he's overhearing from people he doesn't know, and it largely revolves around broader issues of political and cultural realities. The truth is, it is very hard to grasp onto and remember specifics in a story that is so adamantly unspecific. And so I tried to do some research about the story afterwards before just completely, I didn't want to completely write it off without trying to understand more about what was going down here, because I was struck, I guess, by some ideas in the middle of it about, you know, trying to find a place in the world, and there were references to political realities that were very vague, but that perhaps I would have latched onto more if I understood more about the context. And indeed, I'm going to link to a blog post about this story down below, which first of all presupposes that it might be a draft of the author's first chapter of her novel, which then very specifically puts the action in both the US and Ethiopia. But then it also highlights some of the specific, you know, things that people bring up about Ethiopia's news and history. And it could be things that people might pick up on if they had more of a grounding in international news, which, as this blog post points out, so many Americans don't. So it's possible, especially for people who I think want to grapple a little more with unusual modes of fiction, and especially international fiction, that they could get something out of this. Now I'll move on to the novels that I finished, going backwards, starting with the one I finished most recently. This is What We Lose by Zinzi Clemmons, which is a novel that made it to the top of my Goodreads TBR, so I'm very excited that I finally get to read it. I've had this book on my shelves for years. In fact, it came up in my page 112 tag way back in 2020, which is freaky to think I've been playing my page 112 tag for that long. But anyway, this is a very slight novel, and it's about a woman who is in mourning, specifically for her mother, but ultimately as the story progresses, there could be the idea of mourning other relationships as well, particularly the end of her marriage, even if granted the marriage was pretty quickly rushed into once she got pregnant. But anyway, this woman has mixed heritage. Her mother was a mixed colored woman from South Africa, and her father was a black man in the U.S. She grew up in middle class America where there was a little bit of diversity, but not too much. And her best friend is one of the only other black girls in her school. And so we're going in this vignette style of a little bit of her formative growing up years, and then her mother starts feeling poorly when she's a senior in college, and it takes a little while to find the right doctor to realize that she has cancer. And so she is suffering from cancer for the next few years before she dies. And so in these vignettes that actually go back and forth in time a bit, it goes into our main character Thandi caring for her mother and her, relationship with her mother, and then her feelings of grief and once her mother dies, and what we lose comes from, the pamphlet the hospice gives them after her mother passes, and she's living with her father. She goes back to school and finishes her degree, and then she does start working, and she meets a man who's a bit older than her, and they actually start a long distance relationship, and she gets pregnant, and even though it's a little bit contentious, they ultimately do decide to keep the baby and try things out, and they kind of have a honeymoon period, but then it's pretty obvious that the two of them really aren't meant for each other. So that is the second thing she loses, is her, adult family, as it were, and the first is the fracturing of her childhood family when her mother dies relatively young. And there's other vignettes that take us to seeing her extended family in South Africa, and I felt like the writing was very poignant and beautiful about relationships and loss, but it does get into, I guess you could say, experimental territory. First of all, there's some vignettes that, talk about public figures, and I think she's trying to draw parallels between her character and what her character's going through, and these public stories that she brings up, some from South Africa and some from the US. Sometimes there's pictures and studies, and sometimes there's graphs, and I think that took me out of the story a little bit more. I felt like it was a little too pretentious, and I just wanted to stay with this character who I thought was so well drawn, and it was, tough enough in a way to stay with her anyway, because it's much more stream of consciousness going back and forward in time, and I felt like that was the strongest part of Zinzi Clemmons' writing, and maybe this could be moving to some people, especially going through similar things. I actually have a friend going through something kind of similar, that her husband died very suddenly, very recently. I don't know if, I wouldn't suggest this book to her right away, but I've been thinking about her a little bit, and she's, what she's going through when I'm going through this book, which has its powerful aspects. Next, I'll move on to Brotherless Night by Vivi Ganeshanathan, which I feel like I should either high-five myself about or hide in a corner that I finally got to this novel, which came out about a year ago, and I put it on my anticipated reads list of 2023, and then I just kept kicking it down the road and letting other books take its place in my reading schedule. So I knew I wanted to actually start the year by checking this one off at long last, and I have. And this is another powerful story about loss and about international politics, although it goes in much more detail about what it's actually talking about. The bulk of this story takes place during the 1980s in Sri Lanka, as the Tamil Tigers begin to form and respond basically to persecution of their ethnic minority by the Sri Lankan government. And the Tigers then themselves become more violent, and civilians are often caught between a rock and a hard place. And a lot of this novel is very clearly trying to question a political reality and this growing, well, these are the early days of the Sri Lankan civil war that lasted, decades. And that even though the Tigers started from a situation of trying to rise up and try to, you know, start their own country because they've been being persecuted against, they became, you know, terrorists in their own rights, and that, or, you know, it wasn't, you know, a clear-cut issue of good versus bad. And all of these civilians are really caught in the middle, including our main character, Sashi, who starts as like a 16-year-old. She's aspiring to become a doctor like her oldest brother, who is ultimately killed in government raids. And then she has 3 other brothers, and 2 of them join the Tigers. And things get a bit fraught from there. Actually, her family is perhaps less harassed by the Tigers because her brothers are in it, but ultimately they do force them out of their house to, you know, take over their house and things like that. And meanwhile, Sashi wants to go to school. She ultimately does end up going to medical school, and she becomes very close with a former Tiger sympathizer, her teacher Anjali, and they actually, in their free time, which seems crazy she has any given other events of this novel, they start a feminist book club, and they're looking at other forms of resistance that are, you know, separate from the Tigers, and in fact could criticize the Tigers and Tamil conservative culture as well, and other ways to sort of, you know, push back against the oppression they're facing from Sri Lanka. And then ultimately the Indian peacekeepers come in, and they're also not helpful. They're actually also hurting the civilian population, and there's, you know, evidence of rapes and things like that. So they're really caught in a hard place. But, you know, Sashi is not only, you know, victimized, because she does have this connection to the Tigers and her brothers, and especially a friend of theirs who she refers to as Kay, does pull her into some things, which is easy for her to go into because, you know, she knows them and is worried about them. They're, you know, sort of living on the fringes of society because they're being hunted down. And she's taken to this field hospital for the Tigers. And sometimes she's even just treating, you know, civilians who were caught in the crossfire of these other groups, and sometimes the Tigers. But, you know, in either case, it's what she's doing is being a doctor and just helping people, you know, who are seriously hurt. So, you know, there's always like that question, and she's, you know, asking herself about complicity in a way, but obviously this is not the same as actually going out and committing acts of violence. And then later she does get in a little deeper with Kay, who goes on a hunger strike, which again, you know, she's grappling with, and like, wait, maybe this is nonviolent. And there's also sort of so much interesting connections in here when it comes to Gandhi and Sri Lanka's relationship with Gandhi, and, you know, their religious affiliation is Eastern. You know, there's a lot of Hindu and Buddhist commentary in here. And, yeah, things just are getting more and more fraught. There's, you know, shellings, and there's just danger everywhere. And there's questions about any sort of, you know, freedom of speech, as it were, especially when the Tigers are, you know, ostensibly in charge. Anjali and Sashi are trying to compile and distribute reports, real reports about what's really happening, like to people, even if the Tigers or the other groups don't want that disseminated. So she's just, you know, caught in this place where, you know, these really fraught historical moments are happening all around her, and you know, family and friends are being felled by the conflict. I mean, she's losing more brothers and all that sort of thing. And ultimately, you know, she's ultimately going to get out, because this story does begin with a prologue, and she's in the US, and throughout the story she's asking a bunch of questions. It took me a little while even to get into the story, because I feel like whenever you start with a prologue, first of all, you know, it never seems to be that great of an idea. It's like, you know, you're already distancing me from the story and what's actually going on, and then she has a lot of exposition to try to explain what's going on. So it took me a while to actually center on the characters and who they are and what they're going through specifically. By the end, maybe I did like the questions a little more, that she broke the fourth wall and is asking us, like, you know, this was my experience, what would you say about it? What, like, she's obviously trying to grapple with the complexities and the nuances of the war, and the part she played with the Tigers, and what her family gave and lost to the entire situation. But part of me always kind of wishes for something a little more straightforward, that, you stay in the moment and, deal with the facts in the present tense. But that's, I don't think, how this story was meant to be consumed. We are supposed to see it from a little bit of a distance, and ultimately I do think, I was drawn in, and there's just compelling characters and all of that to view this conflict through, and I really appreciated learning more about it, the specifics of this conflict, and how similar it is to other conflicts in the world where, the right answers and the wrong answers, and, how terrorism and terrorist groups are formed, and how oppression feeds into violence, and all of that. I mean, there's just really compelling questions to think about, and things that shape our world. And the final book I'll talk about is The Dark Forest by Cixin Liu, which I listened to on audiobook. This is the second book of the Three Body Problem trilogy. It may have an overall different series name, but I'll probably keep calling it Three Body Problem Trilogy, especially because of the adaptation that's coming out, which trailer recently dropped, because I guess the adaptation is dropping on Netflix in March. I'll link to the trailer below. It's interesting to look at and think about it, because I think it'll draw me into the story in ways that the writing can't, because especially in this book where things are getting much more obtuse. And so in this second book, to give a little bit of a recap, aliens are coming and they're not friendly. Spoiler alert. I'm not sure where else I can start other than there. The Earth is in a crisis mode. The Trisolarans won't be here for 400 years, but it's quite obvious that there's no way we can beat them, and their advanced technology. They already have these sort of spy constructs here called sophons that are explained in much more hard science terms than I say. So they know everything that we might be planning, and there's also a block on human scientific development. So basically, like, how can we win? The only possible way, apparently, is for the UN to create this program of wall facers, where some individuals, usually with, huge amounts of political or military clout, have unlimited resources given to them to think up some grand way to save humanity. Also, there is such a thing as hibernation, so that they could go to sleep for a while, because obviously we're in this for the long haul. So, maybe they'll start something in year, 5 of the crisis mode, and then move on, go to sleep for 100, 200, whatever years. So ostensibly, our main character is the most unlikely of the wall facers, this, go nowhere professor, but he's the only one the Trisolarans actually want to kill. And I think it's pretty obvious from the very beginning. It's because he studies cosmic sociology, and that'll ultimately, after a long slog, play into how his wall facer plan, the only one that isn't broken very quickly by the pro-alien human group, the Wall Breakers. The whole wall facer thing seems a bit obscene in a way, like I don't know, like, it doesn't seem like it could possibly work to hide anything from the aliens anyway, unless you can manifest a space fleet without, putting in all the, having all the people under you put in all the work of making it happen. Oh boy, and I'm running out of battery. So I might not have much more time to say that I still found the characters to be really wooden. I liked them a lot less, and the plot a lot less than the first book. The translator was different. I don't know if that played into it. By the end of the book, we get into the Dark Forest theory, and Luoji kind of saves the day after being a complete ass in the beginning of the book, complete with a sexist subplot and all of that. And again, I do feel like probably watching it on TV will really change my perception, seeing it played out by, in real, like, in action, with people playing, more human characters who don't speak so robotically. I have higher hopes for the adaptation, and I wonder if it'll change my perception of the series, and particularly this book. But overall, as impressive as the science was, and some of like the linguistic and social stuff to a certain degree, I think this was like a slog of a middle. I hope the third book is a little better. Well, maybe I'll get to it. We'll have to see. But for now, I think I'm going to leave it there. And it could be I'm going to run out of battery before I even stop talking anyway. Yeah, I'm hoping my next video I'll get to quickly is my first author's answer video of the year, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I do have to get up and move into work anyway, so it's a good time to stop. And I hope you all are enjoying your January in reading, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.